Hello and welcome to The Game Changers, the podcast where you'll hear from extraordinary trailblazing women in sport. I'm Sue Anstis, a founding trustee of the Women's Sport Trust charity and the founder of Fearless Women, a company with a powerful ambition to drive positive change for women's sport. I'm thrilled to say that this series of The Game Changers is supported by Sport England, who have done so much to tackle the inequalities women face across all areas of sport. From the much celebrated This Girl Can campaign and initiatives that help shape school sport for girls, to schemes that encourage more female volunteers in the workforce, support female coaches and officials, and ensure more women from all backgrounds take leadership positions on the boards of our sports organisations. My guest today is Eleanor Oldroyd, one of Britain's most respected sports broadcasters. If you love sport, you'll be incredibly familiar with Elly's voice, and she's been on our airwaves since the 1990s and is a real trailblazer for women in sports media. Twice voted Sports Presenter of the Year, Elly hosts powerful debates and documentaries for the BBC, and right now she hosts BBC 5 Live's Weekend Breakfast and The Inside Track. Along with regular cricket commentary, Elly's often a guest on shows like Fighting Talk, and of course, she's been a key BBC presenter at every Olympics and Paralympics since 1992. I asked Elly to tell me about the day she missed school to head to Lord's with her dad.
Well, I was a cricket obsessive as a teenager, sort of at the age of 14, 15. I just suddenly got really into cricket, having not liked it at all and not being interested in it. And then became really obsessed when the West Indies were over in 1976. So the Fire in Babylon series. And the following year, my dad got tickets to go to Lord's for the Test match against Australia. And it was 2 days. So he got tickets on Thursday and Friday, and he took my brother on the Friday and he took me on the Thursday. And in order for me to take a day off school, he wrote to my headmistress and said, I would like to take Eleanor out of school for a day. She has expressed a desire to be the first woman cricket correspondent of the Times. So I feel this would be an educational visit for her. And actually, I don't think I had. I think this is something he'd completely made up, this idea of being the first woman cricket correspondent of the Times. But because my head, it was a very academic girls' school, and I think the head thought, well, of course, anything that our girls want to do, they should be able to do. So she agreed, and I, went along, and it rained all day, and I think we saw about half an hour's play in the entire day. But I just had these incredible memories of walking around the ground, and so walking underneath the old grandstand, which was, it still is, it is still a covered walkway and sheltering under that. And then seeing some of the Australian players walking towards us, in their white jumpers with the green V and the green caps, and just thinking, wow, these are just giants of sport. And actually, that's quite funny to think about that actually my sporting heroes or my cricket heroes were the West Indian players and the Australian players. So that was the first time I thought, actually, being a sports journalist, getting paid to watch cricket all day was going to be something to aspire to.
And you said that, so your dad took your brother on the Friday and you on the Thursday. So did he generally treat you equally in terms of taking you along to sport?
Yes, well, we didn't go to see a lot of sport together growing up. Actually, I've got two brothers, two younger brothers, and we used to go and we went to watch cricket in Canterbury quite a bit because my grandparents lived down in Kent. So we were a big cricket loving family, and we used sometimes to go to Worcester to watch them play as well. But we didn't go to football particularly. I mean, the first time I went to football was actually with my middle brother, with my brother who's 2 years younger than me, Andrew. And he became a Birmingham City fan at school because we grew up in Shropshire. We grew up in South Shropshire, where there was no sport around really to go to, But because one of his teachers was a Birmingham fan, he became a Birmingham City fan. And so we started to go together in the mid to late 70s, when it was a horrible place to go to. I mean, it was violent, and it was, St Andrews is in a not very nice part of Birmingham. Very scary getting the train up there and walking down to the ground. And then we'd get opposing fans. I remember going to see Birmingham against Leeds and walking out afterwards, and all the Leeds fans had been kept behind in the away end, and they were just lobbing half bricks at the Birmingham fans. It was just extraordinary to think about it now. but I just loved going. I loved going to watch football, and just got caught up in that, that tribalism and that excitement about it. So it was kind of quite a natural thing to go and watch sport from, my teens onwards, really.
And do you think you were aware at the time that there weren't women playing cricket or football at that level? Did it occur to you at the time?
I don't think it did. I mean, I was aware of obviously there were girls at my school who were incredibly sporty, and I wasn't sporty at all. So I had no aspirations to play sport whatsoever. In fact, I mean, I would actively avoid playing sport if I could. But I think at my school, if you excelled in a particular field, so if you were really musical, you were really encouraged, or if you were really academic, you were encouraged to follow that path. If you were really sporty, you were encouraged. But if you kind of fell below the sort of B team standards, there was nothing for you really. So I fell out of playing sport really quite early, and I do regret that actually. I think it's sad that I missed out on everything that we know sport gives you. But I think, I mean, I because we obviously we watch sport all the time. We watched Grandstand, and we watched Wimbledon, and we watched the Olympics, and Match of the Day. So if you're watching Wimbledon or the Olympics, then you were seeing great sporting heroines. You were seeing Mary Peters, you were seeing Chris Evert and Yvonne Goolagong, and all of these extraordinary women who played these individual sports. And that's the thing, it was the individual sports, the athletics or the tennis. And women's team sports didn't ever really get shown, apart from the odd hockey international at Wembley, which would get on every so often. And yeah, it didn't feel like an odd thing to me at the time when it should have done.
It's interesting because we're a very similar age, actually, and I look back at my own history and think, actually, I don't remember me being aware of it being an issue in the way that
Mm,
we do now, really. And
no.
when did a career in sport, in media, kind of come to you, as it were, aside from your dad saying you should be doing it or suggesting it, planting the seed?
Yeah, well, I think from that seed, I then, when I left school and went to university, I thought, I'll give it a go. I'll do a bit of sports journalism, or I'll try and do some student journalism. And I was, it's these little kind of little tipping points, these little moments where you meet somebody who encourages you and gives you that idea that you can do something. In my first year at university, one of my friends was in the year above me at college, and one of her friends was sports editor of the student newspaper at Cambridge. And she was a woman called Anne. And so there she was doing this role as sports editor of the student newspaper. And she was a big cricket fan as well. And because I saw her doing it, and she then encouraged me, and I said, I want to write about sport. She said, okay, well, I do the cricket, of course, because I'm the sports editor. So this is my job. But you can go and do the hockey. So I went and covered men's hockey in my first year at university. And I just had this feeling of, oh my God, I'm going to get caught out because I know nothing about men's hockey. But actually, you can work out what's happening if you know how team sports work. And then in my second year, I then took over from her as sports editor, and then I got to cover the cricket. And and because you got a decent standard of cricket to watch, obviously, because it's Cambridge University, so the counties at the start of the season in April and May would come and play games there. And so I interviewed David Gower, was the first sort of serious sporting interview I did, and he was charming, and as you'd expect. But you play it to being a student journalist. I think you don't really think it's going to be my career long term. But when I graduated, I applied for jobs, didn't get anywhere, and then went and worked in my local radio station in Worcester. I went back to live at home and worked for £5 a day, just doing work experience for them. So £5 a day, which paid my train fare to Worcester. And then my editor, my news editor, I said to him, I want to cover sport. And he said, yeah, of course. And this was 1984, 1985, when there were no women doing that, no women really on the radio, or very few covering sport at all. But he said, yes, of course, why shouldn't you? That kind of pattern, in a way, of, my headmistress, my friend at university, my first news editor, who never turned around and said, you can't do this because you're a woman, just laid the path, or, kind of laid that path for me to follow. So I think I think I was very fortunate, but I kind of worked at it. I did work hard at it.
And was print journalism and newspapers an option you considered because you were working on a newspaper, etc., at Cambridge?
Yeah. Well, I applied for newspaper graduate jobs and didn't get anything. Didn't get anywhere. And I do remember going for an interview with one newspaper group, sort of regional newspapers, and this guy saying, talking to me about just discussing sport with me for quite a long time, and then at the end of it saying, "Well, it's been very interesting discussing rugby football with a little blonde," and and that was it. But didn't offer me a job. So actually, in the end, I took my fate into my own hands, I think, really, and went back to this news editor and who'd said, "Well, yes, of course, you should be able to do sport," and started off 4 days a week. Well, just on doing a week's work experience, which then turned into a year and a half.
And hats off to him then for getting it started. We talk about male allies and the mentors and so on, but
Absolutely, absolutely. I think if I hadn't been able to broadcast, I would have been found out quite quickly. And if I hadn't known about sport, and actually, there's a story that one of my friends tells, who I met actually at New Road in Worcester in about 1985, and he's still one of my best friends now, Duncan. And he says that he remembers me sitting in the press box at New Road, and it was an open press box, so there wasn't a little soundproof booth, and being surrounded by all these male journalists and having to phone in my report on the hour. And every time I phoned my report in, the whole press box fell silent and listened to every word I was saying. And at about tea time on the first or second day, the chap who was sitting next to me turned around and said, "You do know what you're talking about, don't you?" As if because the assumption was that I wouldn't know what I was talking about because I was female. And then this, "Oh, okay, right. You've proved that you know." And I think this is the case for women in pretty much every walk of life. Actually, you just have to prove yourself, and you have to keep proving yourself, and you can't afford to make mistakes. Or if you do make mistakes, you're judged much more harshly for it.
and did it feel as if you'd fallen into straight into your dream job, covering cricket and, as you say, interviewing and talking about cricket?
It did a bit, actually. Yes, I mean, I do remember because I couldn't drive at that stage, but jumping on my bike and putting my phone, because you had to take your phone with you and then plug it in the press box, and my portable recorder, and putting it in my bike basket and cycling down to New Road, and having to pinch myself because yeah, it did feel, how come I'm doing this so soon? So I think, I had quite a charmed life, and that was, I think, down to David. I mean, his name's David Holdsworth, and he became the head of the English regions for the BBC. So I like to think that he was
We should
rewarded
give him
for
a
him.
name check, shouldn't we?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. But no, he was. You're absolutely right. I think male champions, are very, very powerful. Male advocates are very powerful for women in any walk of life.
Excellent. After time, they say, at BBC Shropshire, then you went in 1988, I think, onto a national station. So you moved across to the BBC to work more on news. So why the shift away from sport then?
Well, I think, when I went to Radio Shropshire, so I had a year and a half at Radio Wyvern in Worcester, and then about, when was about 2.5 years at Radio Shropshire, where I did cricket and I did ice hockey. But because Shropshire wasn't a very sporty, it wasn't exactly a sport hotbed. So there was Shrewsbury Town, there was Telford Tigers ice hockey, there was Shropshire cricket in the summer, and there were a few, kind of sports names. There was RAF Cosford, where they used to do athletics. So there were a few sporting events that happened, but there wasn't enough work doing sport. So I started doing news as well. So I was a news reporter for part of the week and then sport at the weekend. And the person who kind of then paved the way for me was Sybil Ruscoe. So she was at Radio Shropshire with me, and then she got a job at Newsbeat on Radio 1 and then recommended me to the news editor. And so that was my first step into national broadcasting. And I'm so glad I did that, because to learn to be a news journalist is so, it just makes you a better rounded person, I think, and a better rounded journalist. It was an extraordinary time, actually, because it was late 80s, so 88 to 1991. And we had things like, the Hillsborough disaster obviously happened while I was there. I had things like the Herald of Free Enterprise, Lockerbie, there was the hostage crisis in Lebanon, there was the ongoing crisis in Northern Ireland. So it was a really fascinating time to work in news. But I still did the odd sports story to keep my hand in. But then the head of sport at the time in radio, Bob Shannon, who's now managing director of radio, I think made the decision in about 1990 that he wanted to get more women on the air doing sport. The year before I joined, he employed Charlotte Nichol, who was the first woman to do football on the radio, and it was hard. I mean, it was really hard for her, and she will tell you. the atmosphere was awful. She was made to feel really small, and a lot of the men in that department would go out of their way to try and make her feel inferior and undermine her. And actually, so the following year when I went, it was a little bit easier. So she'd taken the flak, as it were, I think, and I admire her for what she did, because it really wasn't a very easy atmosphere. She stuck it out, and she moved into production, and she became, BBC Radio's England football producer, and did an incredible job, and it still works in football now. But I think it was slightly easier for me because Charlotte had been the first. And yeah, and then so I then went to present programs and do football, and the following year went and did my first Olympics in 1992. So I lucked out, really. I came at a good time.
And can you remember the moment they told you that you were going to be going to Barcelona to the Olympics?
I just remember it being, yeah, I just remember being so excited, and so much, remembering all the Olympics that you've covered in the past. And I suppose everyone was talking about it at that point and thinking, okay, there will be a team that will go. But then actually it was kind of bittersweet, because about a month before I went, my mother developed breast cancer.
Oh.
And I just remember taking the call at work, from her to say that she was going into hospital for this operation, and just that, oh my God, I don't know whether I should go or not. And talking to her and saying, of course you should go, of course you should go. And so I spent quite a lot of money on phone calls back home from Barcelona. And fortunately, she had the operation and came through it, and is still going strong, aged 89. So, but it was a difficult time. Yeah, I remember working so hard out there, and never feeling like I could take a break, and never going to look around Barcelona, or just doing every hour that was put in front of me, because I thought that's what you should do. And so I never took breath. I never really appreciated it, and I kind of learnt then subsequently that you have to go and see the city. You've got to get out of the Olympic bubble, and explore, and get a sense of the place, because otherwise you're not telling the story of the Olympics, really.
Yeah. And you've since been a lead presenter and commentator at nine more games.
Well, in fact, it's 11. Tokyo would have been my 12th. I mean, but this is summer and winter. So I've done every summer game since 92, up to Rio, and then I've done 4 Winter Olympics. So 7 summer and 4 winter so far. And it's, yeah, I mean, it's the thing that has defined my career in lots of ways, I think, those extraordinary 3-week chunks of time where the focus of the sporting world is on this particular place. But as far as favourites go, I mean, I loved Sydney, because people in Australia are passionate about sport, and it looked so amazing as well. I remember broadcasting on the opening night. It was crazy. It was a crazy opening ceremony, and then the next morning, doing a programme on the steps of the Sydney Opera House, and feeling, wow, this is, you are at the centre of the sporting world at one of the most iconic times in this city's whole history. Um, so that was amazing. But I think it's also the experiences that you have when you're there as well. So the social time, it's the people you're with, it's the way it works for you. So in 2000, I had my daughter with me. So she was only 8 months old, 7 months old. My then husband Nick was out working on games as well. So we took Erin out with us, and my mother-in-law came and looked after the baby, and we were, they'd set us all up in 2-bedroom flats. So rather than the hotels, we were in 2-bedroom apartments. But because we were married, obviously, we shared a bedroom, and then it meant that Nick's mum came. We flew her out, and she had the bedroom, and she took Erin around Sydney and had the most amazing time with her. So that was a really happy time, because it was very sort of, I felt that I could do my job and be a mum. And then, yeah, so each game's meant different things to me at different stages in my life as well. And so actually, and then when it came to 2012, because my second daughter was born in 2001, so I had 2 children within 17 months. But when it came to 2012, I knew as soon as we got the games. So when the announcement was made, one of the first things I thought was, in 2012, the girls will be 12 and 11, and they will understand and appreciate what the Olympics means, and to have it in your city, and why every few years, they're both their parents have disappeared off. So in 2008, when they were 8 and 7, and they spent that whole summer staying with grandparents. And then in 2012, I remember walking around the Olympic Park with them and saying, "Do you get why this is so important to mum and dad?" And they said, "Yes, we really do. This is really, really cool." So that was special. That was a special time as well.
When I told my husband I was talking to you today, he said he's not a man of mass flattery, but he said, "She's great, Eleanor. Whenever I hear she's hosting a show, I know it's in safe hands," which is lovely. And I'm sure there's almost that chaos behind the scenes, especially live sport on live radio. So how do you remain so calm, or at least you sound it on radio?
It's it's experience. It's just doing it a lot. I'm sure I wasn't calm in the early days at all. I think about doing live sports programs in the early 90s, and I probably wasn't all that great at it. But you learn how to do it. You learn how to cut out the noise, I suppose, and to let the adrenaline give you a boost rather than scare you. And yeah, and doing your research. So, you talk to Claire Balding, and she will always say that she does so much research. And if you know what to expect, and you've got things written down, you've got enough notes written down in front of you. So standing in Olympic Park, I'm thinking about standing in the Olympic Park in Rio in 2016, when we'd just come out of the pool. So, Adam Peaty had been swimming. I was about to go to the gymnastics, and it was Max Whitlock, and we had a medal being won in the canoeing, and there was another medal. Another shooter was going for a medal up at the shooting range, and actually, it's amazing what you can do if you've just got written down in front of you shooting, the name of the person, of the athlete, the name of the broadcaster. Having everything on one sheet of paper makes life very much easier, if you're having to flick through things all the time. But then I couldn't have done that in 1992 or 1996. The more you do it, the better at it you get. And I think, experience is irreplaceable, really.
And do things go wrong live on air? Have you any experiences you could share at all of moments?
Oh my goodness, yes. I mean, undoubtedly. Well, actually, I'm going back to that standing in the Olympic Park in Rio. It was a really strange games weather-wise, because there were days when it was swelteringly hot and humid, and there were days when it was cold and grey and wet. And the International Broadcast Centre is always, every IBC I've ever been into is freezing cold, because they blast in the air conditioning. So you're going from hot, humid atmosphere outside to freezing cold inside. And of course, I got a cold, and I got a really horrible cold. And I was just starting a 6-hour program, so going on air. I was on air from about midday till 6 o'clock in the evening, and standing in the Olympic Park and suddenly starting to cough, and I couldn't stop coughing, and I couldn't speak because I was coughing. So I just picked up this chesty cold, and I think it was Conor McNamara who was there with me to talk about the boxing. And when you're talking and you're talking, and you have to somehow say to somebody, "My voice is about to go. I can't speak. I can't speak without coughing." And in the end, I think I had to sort of cough and say, "Right, okay, I think at this point, Connor, you're going to have to take the microphone and talk for a bit, because I can't talk anymore." And at that point, I was taken off air, taken to my hotel room. I mean, in the context of where we are at the moment with coronavirus, I had to quarantine for 2 days in my hotel room. And our lovely fixer, our Brazilian fixer, took me to the doctor and explained what was wrong with me, and they gave me all sorts of drugs. And I was banned from being on the air for about 2 days. And that was horrible, because you think, well, you're there to work, you're there to broadcast, and if you're missing out on things, then it's just an awful feeling. So that does happen occasionally. I got a terrible cold at the Ashes as well in Brisbane in 2017, and yeah, but there's nothing you can do, really. You just have to accept it.
It's life. I was really sad this year when the Friday Sports panel finished, and I think particularly because it gave voice to so many incredible female athletes. So at the moment, do you feel there is enough coverage of women's sport on TV and radio?
Well, I mean, we've made incredible progress, bearing in mind where we were 20 years ago. It's extraordinary, really, because I think, you go back to what we were saying about, it used to be the Olympics, it used to be Wimbledon, you would see female athletes, but in team sports, you really wouldn't. And I think that it all kind of started to change around 2012, really. So, with people going to watch the women's football team at Wembley and thinking, wow, this is incredible. And then increased professionalism. And it's this virtuous circle of, increase in better coverage, increased professionalism, more money, more time that the athletes could spend learning their trade, getting better at it, making a better and a more professional product. So it's taken a long time, and it's taken a lot of banging heads against brick walls, I think. But I think after 2012, it was a real turning point. And then you've then had a generation of people who were confident. I mean, actually, I think about Rachel Hayhoe Flint, who was, again, one of the most influential women, I think, in women's sport, and one of the best people I ever met, and such an extraordinary advocate for her sport. And the fact that she used to write her own match reports for the Daily Telegraph, after captaining the England women's cricket team, she would then go and write and file her reports. But in order to be able to have that confidence to speak out for your sport was quite I think it must have been crushing for women who wanted to speak out on behalf of their sport, but there weren't the outlets, because sports pages particularly, and I think the sporting landscape has changed as well. But certainly when I was starting out, it was all about pages in newspapers, and the sports editors were all men, and and the focus was all on men's sport, and I do think that men's football just dominates the landscape in a way that nothing else does. And I think actually that all other sports apart from men's football struggle to find, space on in newspapers. But I think the fact that the broadcast and media landscape has changed as well, and there is much more access to blogs and to podcasts and to online coverage as well, has improved things, and it's given that it's allowed that basis to build up. But anyway, so it's a very long-winded way of saying, but yeah, I mean, but the Friday Sports Panel, I love doing that because it was invented really to try and tap into what came out of London 2012. So the stories of athletes and allowing people to have a voice across men's sport, women's sport, disability sport as well. And it was a really lovely program to do, and it was fun to do. But controllers have different things that they want to do with their networks sometimes. And the one thing that I am happy about is that we've managed on a Thursday night with Darren Campbell to kind of slightly take some of the elements of that and to have great voices, great women role models. Hopefully it's opened up an idea for people to think, well, yeah, we can get people like, the Richards and Walshes, for example, Kate and Helen, who are regulars, Helen Glover, who is a regular voice on it as well, Becky Adlington. I think there are more people who are doing it now, and maybe we played a small part in that, maybe we didn't, but I was really proud that we did it.
Excellent. No, I love listening. When Five Live was accused of being a bit of a radio bloke, I think was the phrase a few years ago, you wrote an article in The Guardian saying that was absolutely not your experience. But do you feel, I guess we've talked a little bit about that, haven't we, that you've had the same opportunities as male broadcasters through your career?
Well, I do, really. I do. And I think it's, I came in at the start of, women getting roles in broadcasting, and then obviously Claire Balding came in when I was, I hadn't been there for very long, but she was instantly a natural broadcaster. Occasionally you meet people who are absolute naturals, and Claire was from day one. But yes, I mean, I think I had it was that right time when bosses felt it was the right thing to do, to give opportunities to women. Although I think that there was that sense at the time, and it still exists to a degree, that if you have a woman doing it, you don't need another woman. So she is the female football reporter or the female football broadcaster. And I think what we're seeing now, actually, in the cricket, and it struck me when I was just doing the test matches last week, was that you've got Isha Guha presenting as the face of BBC TV. You've got Isha and Alison commentating. You've got Ebony Rainford Brent, on Sky as well. You've got me on the radio. So actually, you've got really, people at front and centre. But it's still very male dominated. We're a long way away from 50-50, and maybe we never will be. But we are, the opportunities are there, and I think it's for young women and girls to be able to look and say, right, okay, if she's doing it, then I can do it. And actually, we're kind of going back a little bit to when I first thought, well, maybe I can work in sport. The only person that I knew who was doing it was Julie Welsh in the Observer, and I saw her byline on a Sunday, and it was clearly a woman writing about football, and that made me think, oh, I can do that. And I think the more that we've had of those sort of examples, the better. But I think people employing me have never stood in my way, so I've always had opportunities. I think what was hard then, but I didn't see it so much, and is hard now in a different way, is people telling you shouldn't be on air because you're female. So the social media abuse that I see, young women broadcasters get now, I just feel I'm so glad that social media wasn't around then, because maybe I wouldn't be where I am now. So I used to get people writing to me to say, you shouldn't be on the radio, get back in the kitchen. What do you know about it? You're female. But in order to actually take the time to write a letter, sit down with a pen, a piece of paper, and an envelope and a stamp, and find out the address and take it to the post box, it's considerably more effort than sitting on social media and typing in something abusive. So, I mean, I think attitudes have definitely changed. And actually, I saw there's a young Sky presenter called Kate Mason, who I've known for a while. She came through one of the BBC opportunity programs, and somebody had tweeted something horrible to her, just something personal and nasty, and she'd retweeted it, and the amount of supportive comments she got was brilliant. And that's changed as well. I think that has now become, people realise that, of course, women are perfectly capable of doing it.
And do you feel you've always been, you're confident you've been equally paid to your male counterparts in terms of the roles you've done across the years?
Let me take a large slug of coffee before I answer that. It's such a difficult question to answer because, as I said, I've got kids. I've got 2 kids. And so when it came to 2000, and I went to the Olympics with my baby and my then husband, and the BBC helped that to happen, or certainly didn't, never stood in my way. But I then had another child 17 months later. And so I stepped back from presenting mainstream programs for a few years. And once you step back, it's quite difficult to step back up again. And throughout the time that my children were small, I was given opportunities. So I didn't miss an Olympics. I didn't miss the Summer Olympics. I did 2004 when they were 4 and 3. I did 2008 when they were 8 and 7. And you have to make it work with childcare and so on. But fortunately, when the Olympic Games until 2020, when sporting events are going to be. So you can plan. You can say to the grandparents, please, can you have them? But then you develop this gratitude that you're being allowed to carry on working. That oh, thank you so much for giving me these opportunities to work while and allowing me to balance my life. And I wanted to be able to spend time with my kids as well, and to be there to do homework and take them to ballet and and all these things, and to be a good mum to them. And I got divorced as well in when they were quite small, and so that made life a bit more complicated as well. And and I've had a great relationship with their dad, and we still do have a great relationship. And he did his share of the childcare as well. But for me personally, no, I don't think I did get paid as much as a man in my position. But I don't regret the time I had with my girls. And they're now 20 and 20 and 19, and they understand actually that it was compromise. It was a balancing act. But I don't know how you get over that. Really, it's very very difficult. And I think that sense of gratitude, almost of imposter syndrome, that women tend to have is a real thing. And I wish I could say to young women now, don't undervalue yourself. don't get the sense of thank you so much for my maternity rights, because they are they're your rights, and don't ever think of yourself as not deserving of it, because I mean, I think I only got over the imposter syndrome when I about 5 years ago, and that feeling that I deserved to be where I was.
I think it's sad, isn't it? I think it's an age thing. I think I'm very similar in my fifth, turning 50, whatever. I think, yeah, it's sad that it takes 50 years to get there, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm going to move you on, and I know you've covered some really hard-hitting debates and documentaries over the years, and you've won many awards in the process. So, why do you feel why are you so passionate about that area of your work?
Well, it's about storytelling, I think. If you want to tell stories about people's situations, and I look back now and I think actually there are more things we could have done, and things that we almost shied away from. I look at the stories about abuse in gymnastics and think, well, if we'd been a bit braver, we could have told those stories earlier. But I remember doing programs about, funny enough, talking about maternity rights and about how hard it was for women to be able to take time off to have children when they played elite sport. And I think that has slightly been tackled now. I think it's slightly easier, but it helps if you are Jessica Ennis-Hill, and have endorsements. And Jess is incredible. I mean, my God, what an amazing athlete she is, and how inspiring she is. But if you don't have financial backup
and support,
it's really difficult to carry on and be an athlete.
And are there other topics you'd like to cover in the future? Would you like to do more of the documentary-led pieces?
I'm sure there are, and I hope they are there. I mean, obviously at the moment everything is slightly on hold. But I mean, things like Black Lives Matter as well, and that's something that I think has pulled all of us up and made us think, well, we didn't really have the honest debates, and did I really talk? I suppose it all sort of broke in the middle of lockdown with the George Floyd tragedy, and I remember talking to Darren Campbell about it on the air, and about how this had been his life, and and friends that I'd never discussed it with, and Ebony is a good friend. Ebony Rainford Brent is a great friend, and seeing her speaking out on Sky has made me think, why did we not tell this? Why could we not tackle this earlier? So it's things that are there, and maybe that their time comes that they have to be discussed. So I do hope that we do get the chance to do that.
The podcast is called The Game Changers, and it's about game-changing women in sport. And so many of the trailblazers I've spoken to in previous series, so Claire Balding and Jo Tung and Jackie Oatley, have all talked about you and how they were inspired by you. And how does that make you feel now when you hear that?
Well, I mean, it's incredibly lovely. I mean, it's incredibly sweet of them to say that. And I feel very humbled by that, because I'm incredibly proud of what they've done. And every single woman who makes it in this business has to make sacrifices and has to compromise something about their lives, I think, in some way. And and Jackie was so strong when she put up with the rubbish that she got at the time. So I mean, she was a real trailblazer. I would never have been brave enough to do football commentary, and because I think at the time, actually, women commentators were still, so I missed out on doing commentary really at that stage of my career, in sort of the late 90s, early 2000s. I deliberately turned away from that, because I thought, I will be judged so harshly. You've got to be so good and so beyond reproach, or beyond criticism. Otherwise, people will criticize you. And you think, now why? Why were people so harsh on female commentators? It was this ridiculous thing about, oh, your voice gets too squeaky. Just ludicrous. It's just stupid to think that. As if men's voices never get shrill. And I think, Claire has been so brave with the way that she's talked about her personal life, and opened up, and become a true national treasure. But she wouldn't have done what she's done if she hadn't been unbelievably good at it. And as I said, that talented broadcaster that I first met, when she was fresh out of university, and also this extraordinary work ethic that she has as well. And for Jo as well to take on the unbelievably male-dominated world. I mean, I remember when women were first admitted to the PFA dinner, and I think I went the first year that they admitted women to the PFA dinner, and it was a really horrible atmosphere in lots of ways. It's really blokey. And I remember being there with one of the very attractive female sports presenter, and walking with her to the ladies' loo, because she said, "Are you going to the loo?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Oh, will you come with me?" So I was kind of like her wing woman as she walked between these tables of young footballers, all just leering in the most horrible way. And this blokey world is changing for the better now, but yeah, I mean, throughout the 90s and until quite recently, it was a difficult place to be in. You had to have a thick skin. And you think about the Me Too movement now, and if we'd talked about that then, I wonder whether we'd have got jobs. I mean, I do think I'd put up with things. You do turn a blind eye, you do smile prettily, laugh off remarks, because you don't want to make a fuss. You don't want to make a big deal about it. You don't want to damage these fragile male egos, for God's sake, because you worry about your future. You worry about your job. So even though I had these strong male advocates that I talk about, my bosses, there were plenty of people who would have done anything to undermine me or make me feel small or just put me in my place.
As you said, just to finally, we feel it's a more positive place now for women coming in to sports media. So for women listening to this podcast who are kind of starting on that journey of either journalism or broadcasting, what advice would you give to them today?
Work hard, know your subject, and I mean those are basic things. I do think it's hopefully a better place to be, and a more welcoming place. Don't ever feel that you're less qualified than a guy. Do anything within reason. Take opportunities that are offered you. So when I started out in local radio, I did everything that was put in front of me. So I presented programs, I reported on different things. I went and got the tea and helped other people out whenever I could. Be someone who's nice to work with, because that makes a big difference. If you're a nice person, then people will give you opportunities. Listen to people who have done it already. Learn from people who are just a little way ahead of you. It doesn't have to be people who've been doing it for nearly 30 years like I have. It can be people who are just a year ahead, and you've got to love it, because it is hard work and it is antisocial sometimes, but it's so rewarding, and I just feel so fortunate that I've done it. And I do have to pinch myself sometimes to think I am. I was in the bubble, in the cricket bubble recently, and I was just sitting in the bar in the hotel in Manchester, having a long chat to Michael Holding, who, going all the way back to that 1976 Fire in Babylon series, was one of my idols, whispering death, as they called him, because you couldn't hear him coming and he bowled so fast. And, and I just was thinking, this is just, if I could show the 14-year-old me where I am now, then, you would have to pinch yourself, because you can't quite believe it. So I never lose that sense of wonderment and love and appreciation of the job that I do.
I love talking to Elly. It's clear to see why she's been such an inspiration to so many women working in sports media. Thank you to everyone who's reviewed and rated the Game Changers podcast. It makes a massive difference to raising our profile and ensuring more people get to hear the stories of these remarkable women in sport. Thanks again to Sport England for their kind support, and also to Sam Walker, the executive producer for the podcast. You can find out more about all 41 of my incredible guests from this and the previous series at fearlesswomen.co.uk. Or come and say hello on social media, where you'll find us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at Sue Anstis or at The Game Changers. My guest next week is Dame Sarah Story, the most successful British female Paralympian of all time, with 38 world titles, 14 Paralympic golds and 76 world records.
I think there are some things that don't need to go, they don't need to be sort of out there. Are you planning to have a baby is an incredibly, personal question, but somehow certain parts of the press seem to think it's okay to ask. It's like, well, mind your own business, thanks very much.
The Game Changers. Fearless Women in Sport.